It started with a party. A seemingly innocent night meant to celebrate my younger sister, Elle, and her career milestone. What I didn't know was that the evening would end with me lying at the bottom of a staircase, cradling a fractured wrist and whispering prayers for the safety of my unborn child. I'm 28 years old, and this pregnancy feels like the culmination of a long, agonizing journey. For 2 years, my husband Newton and I tried to conceive. It wasn't just waiting, it was disappointment after disappointment, 2 devastating miscarriages, and endless doubt. I've spent hours staring at negative pregnancy tests, wondering if something was wrong with me, wondering if I could ever give Newton the family we dreamed of. When the doctor confirmed I was pregnant again, I was overjoyed but terrified. I didn't let myself fully celebrate, not yet. I told Newton, and we both cried, holding each other tightly, as though we might lose it all again if we let go. "We'll be careful," he promised, his voice steady. "We'll protect this baby." Because of our history, we decided to keep the pregnancy a secret. Not just from the world, but even from my own family. I didn't want the questions, the pressure, or the well-meaning advice. I especially didn't want their pity if something went wrong again. For 4 months, we held our secret close, and I avoided most family events, citing work or fatigue. That decision wasn't easy. My family thrives on celebrations. Growing up, birthdays, promotions, and even small achievements like passing a difficult exam were met with fanfare. It's one of the things I've always loved about them. But now, it felt too much. I needed space to breathe and focus on keeping my pregnancy as stress-free as possible. My sister Elle was different. Where I preferred a quieter approach to life, she craved attention. After her ex-fiancé humiliated her by canceling their wedding the day before the ceremony, she shifted all her energy to her career. It became her refuge, a way to rebuild her identity. When she landed a significant promotion last week, she was over the moon. For her, this party wasn't just a celebration, it was proof that she was thriving despite everything. "Please come," Elle begged over the phone, her voice unusually soft. "I know you've been busy, but it's been forever since we spent time together. This night means so much to me." I hesitated. I'd been avoiding family gatherings to keep my secret, and I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. But her tone caught me off guard. She sounded vulnerable, almost desperate. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll be there." The party was a lively, elegant affair. Fairy lights adorned the backyard, and the air buzzed with laughter and music. Elle was in her element, basking in the attention of friends and family who had gathered to celebrate her success. I stayed on the edges, dressed in a loose maxi dress and trying not to draw attention to myself. Newton arrived late, having come straight from work. He kissed my forehead and asked quietly, "You doing okay?" I nodded, though the heat of the crowded space and the strong smells from the food were making me queasy. I found myself cornered by my Aunt Mia, whose sharp eyes seemed to take in everything. "You look radiant," she said, narrowing her gaze. "Are you pregnant?" My stomach dropped. No, just busy, I guess," I stammered, trying to deflect. Her eyes lit up with realization. "You are. Oh, my goodness, you're pregnant." Before I could stop her, she clinked her wineglass and announced, "Everyone, I have wonderful news. She's pregnant." The room erupted into cheers and congratulations. My parents rushed over, tears streaming down my mother's face as she hugged me tightly. "Oh, sweetheart, we're so happy for you," she gushed. My father slapped Newton on the back, grinning from ear to ear. I forced a smile, but my chest tightened. This wasn't how I'd wanted to share the news. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply uncomfortable. As I looked around the room, I saw Elle standing near the bar, her smile forced and her body stiff. She wasn't celebrating, she was watching. After the announcement, I made my way over to Elle, determined to smooth things over. "I'm so sorry," I began. I didn't mean for this to happen. Aunt Mia just. Don't worry about it, she interrupted, her tone icy. It's fine. You got what you wanted. What does that mean? I asked, frowning. She shrugged, taking a long sip of her wine. You always get the spotlight, don't you? Tonight was supposed to be about me, but of course, you couldn't help yourself. Her words stung. I didn't plan this. I didn't want anyone to know yet. Right, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because Aunt Mia magically figured it out all on her own. I opened my mouth to argue, but she turned away, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. I felt a lump rising in my throat and decided it was better to walk away than escalate the situation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to keep a low profile, but the constant stream of congratulations and unsolicited parenting advice made it impossible. Newton stayed by my side, his hand resting protectively on my back, but even his presence couldn't ease the growing tension. At one point, I caught Elle glaring at me from across the room. Her face was flushed, and her wineglass was never empty. I wanted to go to her, to apologize again, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked angry. More than that, she looked hurt. As the night wore on, I started feeling nauseous again. The heat from the crowd and the rich food were too much. I excused myself and went inside to find a quiet place to rest. Collapsing onto the living room couch, I closed my eyes and let out a long sigh. For the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe. I must have dozed off, lulled by the muffled sounds of the party outside. When I opened my eyes, the room was dimly lit, and Aunt Mia was sitting beside me. She startled me out of my haze, her ever-watchful eyes fixed on my face. You looked exhausted, dear, she said softly, then leaned in closer, her expression serious. Is everything okay? I nodded, though my body betrayed me with its aches and queasiness. Just a little overwhelmed, I admitted. The baby's fine, though. Her face lit up again. Oh, it's such a blessing, isn't it? I know it's been a long road for you. She paused, then added in a hushed tone, but you know Elle's been through a lot too. It can't be easy for her, seeing you have everything she's lost. The comment stung, even though I knew she meant well. I've tried to be sensitive, I replied, though a knot formed in my stomach. I didn't even want anyone to know tonight. Mia patted my hand and smiled gently. Of course you didn't, dear. These things have a way of coming out. She stood up, smoothing her dress. Take your time in here. Let me handle the family. And with that, she disappeared back into the chaos. I sat for a while, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music from outside, trying to collect myself. My heart was heavy. Elle had always been the center of attention in our family, and I never begrudged her that. She had a magnetic personality, the kind of charisma that made people gravitate toward her. But tonight, the cracks in her facade were showing, and it hurt to think that my happiness might be a source of pain for her. Eventually, I felt a pressing need to use the bathroom. I slipped upstairs, grateful for the quiet as I made my way to the guest bathroom. But it was occupied, so I decided to use the en suite in Elle's room instead. When I emerged, Elle was waiting for me in the hallway. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was cold. The flush on her cheeks and the glassy look in her eyes told me she'd been drinking heavily. Are you really pregnant? She asked, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I blinked, startled by the hostility in her tone. Yes, I replied cautiously. Why would I lie about that? Her lips curled into a sneer. I don't know. Maybe you thought it would be fun to steal the spotlight again. I stiffened, the sting of her accusation cutting deep. Elle, I didn't want anyone to know tonight. Aunt Mia figured it out and told everyone before I could stop her. She took a step closer, her voice rising. You couldn't stop her? Really? You're always so perfect, always the favorite, and now you're having a baby. Mom and Dad are probably planning the baby shower already, aren't they? I tried to calm her down. Elle, that's not fair. You know how hard this has been for me and Newton. I didn't plan this announcement, I didn't even want it. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, poor you, she spat. You didn't want it. You get everything handed to you, and you're upset because someone threw you a parade without your permission? Meanwhile, I've spent the last year picking up the pieces of my life, and you couldn't even bother to tell me you were pregnant. Elle, it wasn't personal, I said, my voice shaking. Newton and I needed time to process this on our own. She laughed bitterly. Right. And when were you planning to tell me? After the baby was born? Or maybe not at all. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't want to hurt you, Elle. That's the truth. Her face twisted into something ugly, and then she said it, the words that would haunt me for the rest of the night. Maybe this pregnancy will end in a miscarriage, just like the others. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The cruelty of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. How could you say that? I whispered, my voice trembling. She shrugged, her expression unapologetic. It's not like it hasn't happened before. The tears came then, hot and fast. You're drunk, and you're being hateful, I said, my voice breaking. I'm done talking to you. I turned to head downstairs, my hands shaking as I gripped the railing. My only thought was to get away from her, to leave the party and never look back. But as I took my first step down, I felt her hand on my back. Then she shoved me. Time slowed. My foot slipped, and I felt myself lurch forward. I grabbed for the railing, my fingers brushing against it but failing to hold on. The world tilted, and then I was falling, my body twisting, my arms flying up to shield my stomach. Pain exploded in my wrist as it struck the edge of a step, and I tumbled downward, each impact rattling through my body. When I hit the bottom, I lay crumpled on the floor, gasping for air. My wrist throbbed with searing pain, and my body trembled as I cradled my stomach. Panic gripped me as I whispered a single prayer over and over, please let the baby be okay. Newton's voice broke through the haze. Oh my God, are you okay? He was at my side in an instant, his hands hovering over me as though afraid to touch me. Elle pushed me, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. She pushed me. Gasps rippled through the room as the rest of the family gathered. My mother's voice rang out, sharp with panic. What? Elle, is this true? I turned my head, and there she was, standing at the top of the stairs. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with shock. I didn't mean to, she stammered. It was a joke, I didn't think. A joke? Newton roared, his face contorted with fury. You pushed my pregnant wife down the stairs, and you think this is a joke? Chaos erupted. My parents rushed to my side, while others turned on Elle, demanding answers. Newton scooped me up in his arms, ignoring my cries of pain as he carried me outside. Someone called 911, and within minutes, I was in the back of an ambulance, clutching Newton's hand as paramedics worked to stabilize me. At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly. They splinted my wrist and ran tests to ensure the baby was unharmed. When the results came back clear, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The baby was safe. For now, at least. Newton sat beside me, his expression dark. You're pressing charges, he said firmly. I won't let her get away with this. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. He was right. Elle had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. The morning after my hospital visit, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. My fractured wrist throbbed, a constant reminder of Elle's actions, and my mind raced with what-ifs. What if I hadn't shielded my stomach? What if the baby hadn't been okay? The fear lingered, clawing at the edges of my thoughts. Newton was by my side, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "We need to talk to the police," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Elle shoved you, and she needs to be held accountable." I nodded, though my stomach churned at the thought. Despite everything, she was still my sister. The idea of dragging her through the legal system felt surreal, but what choice did I have? She had endangered my life and the life of my child. The officers arrived that afternoon to take my statement. Newton was in the room, holding my good hand as I recounted the events of the night. I told them about the argument, the cruel things Elle had said, and the moment she shoved me. The officers listened intently, their faces neutral but their eyes betraying hints of concern. When they left, Newton turned to me. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "She can't just walk away from this." But not everyone agreed. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and messages from my parents. I ignored most of them, but when the house phone rang, something they rarely used, I picked up, curiosity overriding my better judgment. My mother's voice came through the line, sharp and accusatory. "How could you call the police on your sister?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family?" "I'm protecting myself," I replied, my voice trembling with anger. "Elle pushed me down the stairs, Mom. I could have lost the baby. Do you even understand that?" "It was an accident," she snapped. "She didn't mean to hurt you." "She meant to push me," I said, my voice rising. She admitted it. She said it was a joke, but you don't joke by shoving someone down a flight of stairs. There was a long pause before my father's voice cut in. "You're being dramatic. The baby is fine, you're fine. Elle made a mistake, don't ruin her life over this." I felt the tears welling up again. Her life? What about mine? What about the fact that I'm sitting here with a broken wrist, terrified for my child because of what she did? "You're tearing this family apart," my mother said coldly. "If you go through with pressing charges, we'll have no choice but to disinherit you." The word disinherit echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I knew my parents favored Elle, she was their golden child, the one they doted on no matter how badly she behaved. But hearing them threaten me so blatantly was a gut punch. They weren't just taking her side, they were willing to punish me for standing up for myself. When I told Newton about the conversation, his anger flared. "They're manipulating you," he said, pacing the room. "They're trying to guilt you into dropping the charges. Don't let them get into your head." "I know," I said softly. "But it's still hard. They're my parents." He stopped pacing and knelt in front of me, taking my uninjured hand in his. "You're a mother now, too," he said. "Your job is to protect this baby. That comes first, above your sister, above your parents, above everyone else." His words hit me like a jolt of clarity. He was right. My priority wasn't keeping the peace or salvaging broken relationships, it was protecting my child and ensuring they had a safe, loving environment to grow up in. The next few days were a whirlwind. The police arrested Elle on charges of assault and reckless endangerment. She was released on bail shortly after, and the backlash from my parents was immediate. They bombarded me with calls, alternating between pleading with me to drop the charges and berating me for pressing them in the first place. "She's distraught," my mother sobbed during one call. "You're her sister. How can you do this to her? How could she do this to me?" I shot back. "You're more worried about her feelings than the fact that she could have killed me or my baby." "You're exaggerating," she snapped. "And if you don't drop the charges, you're no longer welcome in this family." Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. If my parents were willing to cut me out of their lives to protect Elle, so be it. I wouldn't back down. Elle's arrest sent shockwaves through the family. My parents went into full damage control mode, spinning the narrative to make it seem like I was overreacting and Elle was the victim. But not everyone bought it. Several relatives reached out to express their support, condemning Elle's actions and my parents' response. "I can't believe they're defending her," my Aunt Kathy said during a phone call. "What she did was dangerous, and she needs to face the consequences." Her words were a small comfort in the storm of emotions swirling around me. Newton's family rallied around us, offering their unwavering support. His mother even came to stay with us for a few days, helping out around the house while I adjusted to wearing a cast. Meanwhile, Elle avoided all contact. She didn't call, didn't text, and didn't offer even a hint of an apology. Her silence spoke volumes. She wasn't remorseful, she was just angry that she'd been caught. Eventually, the case went to court. Elle pled guilty to avoid a trial and was sentenced to probation, mandatory therapy, and community service. She was also ordered to pay my medical bills. It wasn't the harshest punishment, but it was enough to send a message. My parents, however, were furious. They blamed me for everything: Elle's legal troubles, the strain on the family, even their own stress. "You've destroyed this family," my mother said during one final, heated argument. "No," I replied firmly. "Elle destroyed this family when she pushed me down the stairs. And you destroyed it when you chose to defend her instead of supporting me." With that, I cut ties. I blocked their numbers, stopped responding to emails, and told Newton's family they were my only family now. It hurt, but I knew it was the right decision. The weeks following Elle's sentencing were a strange mix of relief and sadness. On one hand, the legal process was over, and Elle was finally facing consequences for her actions. On the other hand, I felt the heavy weight of my parents' betrayal. Cutting ties with them wasn't just a decision, it was agree. Newton's family became my safe haven. His mother, a gentle and wise woman, seemed to know exactly when I needed space and when I needed company. She spent hours talking with me, listening without judgment. "Families can be complicated," she said one evening as we sat on the porch together. "But the family you build with Newton, that's the one that matters now." Her words stuck with me. Slowly, I began to focus less on what I'd lost and more on what I was building. Newton and I threw ourselves into preparing for the baby's arrival. We decorated the nursery with soft, pastel colors and filled it with books, toys, and tiny clothes. Every little step felt like a small victory, a reminder of the new life we were bringing into the world. But the past wasn't so easy to leave behind. My parents continued to find ways to reach out, despite my best efforts to block them. They sent letters, emails, even tried showing up at our home once. Newton installed security cameras after that incident, his protectiveness reaching new heights. "They don't get to just walk back into your life after everything they've done," he said firmly. "Not without taking responsibility." I agreed, though part of me still longed for some kind of reconciliation. I wanted my child to have grandparents, to know the kind of big, joyful family I'd grown up with. But I couldn't ignore the reality of their actions. They had chosen Elle's feelings over my safety, over my child's safety. That wasn't something I could forgive easily. 5 months after the incident, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The moment I held her in my arms, all the fear, anger, and sadness melted away. She was perfect: tiny fingers, big curious eyes, and a soft coo that instantly filled my heart with love. Newton cried openly, holding both of us as he whispered, "We did it. She's here." Those early days were exhausting but magical. We stayed up late, taking turns rocking her to sleep, marveling at every little sound and movement she made. Newton's family was a constant presence, helping with meals, cleaning, and babysitting when we needed rest. It was the kind of support I wished my own family could have offered, but I was grateful for what I had. One evening, as I was nursing the baby, there was a knock at the door. Newton answered it, and I heard his voice turn cold. "What are you doing here?" I peeked around the corner and saw my parents standing on the porch, my mother holding a gift bag and my father carrying a basket of baby supplies. "We just wanted to see the baby," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Please, let us in." "No," Newton said firmly, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. I stayed out of sight, clutching my daughter tightly as I listened to the conversation. "You have no right to be here," Newton continued. "You chose to side with Elle after what she did. You threatened to disinherit my wife for protecting herself. And now you think you can just show up and play grandparents?" "We've been trying to make amends," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We've sent letters, we've called." "And you never once apologized," Newton interrupted. "You don't get to act like this is all in the past just because you feel like it. You hurt her. You abandoned her when she needed you the most." There was a long silence. Then my father spoke, his voice low and defensive. "We're still her parents. You should have acted like it when she needed you," Newton snapped. "Now leave. You're not welcome here." I heard the shuffle of footsteps and the quiet click of the door as Newton came back inside. He looked at me, his expression softening when he saw the tears streaming down my face. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to," he said gently. "I don't," I whispered. "Not yet." Over the next few months, I threw myself into motherhood. My daughter became my whole world, and every milestone she reached filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in years. Newton was an incredible partner, always there to support me and remind me of the strength I had when I doubted myself. Therapy helped too. Newton and I started going to sessions together to process everything we'd been through. My therapist helped me unpack the guilt and anger I felt toward my parents and Elle, reminding me that I wasn't responsible for their choices. "Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life," she said during one session. "It's about finding peace for yourself, whether or not they ever change." It was a slow process, but I began to let go of the weight I'd been carrying. I couldn't control my parents or Elle, but I could control how much power they held over me. And as I focused more on my family, the family I was building with Newton, I found myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. 1 year after the incident, I received a letter from Elle. It was short and uncharacteristically subdued, apologizing for what she had done and admitting that her actions had been fueled by jealousy and anger. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote, "but I needed to say I'm sorry." I stared at the letter for a long time, my emotions swirling. It wasn't enough to repair the damage she'd done, but it was a start. Whether or not I would ever respond, I didn't know. For now, I was content to leave things as they were. As for my parents, they continued to send messages and gifts, but I remained firm in my boundaries. Until they could offer a genuine apology and take responsibility for their actions, I wasn't ready to let them back into my life. Newton and I eventually moved to a new house, further from the city and closer to his family. It was a fresh start, a place where we could raise our daughter surrounded by love and support. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined me. I was no longer the woman who fell down the stairs, broken and betrayed. I was a mother, a wife, and a survivor. And that was enough.